Chapter 1. Kelly checked her O2 reserves. She had 30 minutes left before she needed a refill. That meant Elliot probably had less than 10. If they didn't find some oxygen inside Mira, her squad would suffocate before Gunny and Talby could mount a rescue. With Carbonaro holding Elliot a few meters behind her, she had to make sure that any remaining pressure inside the shuttle bay didn't push loose equipment or debris out the door and knock them off the ship. She moved a little more to the side of the door and waited.
"Opening now,"
Dickerson said. The large Marine's voice sounded in control, but Kelly thought she heard a tremble of fear in the man's drawl.
"Make sure you're secure."
"Just open it, Marine," Kelly growled. He didn't respond except to punch the manual switch. The large pockmarked doors began sliding aside, revealing a growing sliver of absolute darkness. Kelly prepared for debris to fly out as the bay depressurized, but nothing escaped the darkness. She shivered. A small part of her wanted Dickerson to close the doors again, and for the squad to risk the long journey back to their ship, the Solar Federation Marine Corps, SFMC, vessel S&R Black. But their skiff, a relatively small transport they'd used to travel from their ship to the Mira, was destroyed. They were low on oxygen, as well as suit thruster fuel. If they tried to escape Mira and return to S&R Black, they would die. The gap in the doors widened. Using her implanted block, she sent a signal to turn her suit lights on to maximum. Bright white light stabbed into the 2-meter wide gash of darkness. A shape 10 meters inside the bay made her catch her breath. Kelly activated her heads-up display, HUD, and changed her vision from normal to low light. Suddenly, she could see much more. The suit's ambient light showed her the shape for what it was, a loader floating in 0G. The loader was empty of its cargo, but several pine-cone-shaped objects floated near it. Not a good sign, she thought. Kelly trained her eyes beyond the loader to see what else was floating near her, but made out nothing more than shapes further in the bay. "What the hell?" Dickerson asked. She turned and saw that he had moved beside her. "Hang back a bit, Dickerson. If something comes at us, you'll be the only protection for Carb and Elliot."
"Aye, Corporal,"
he said. Kelly took a deep breath and walked into the bay using her magnetic boots, her vibroblade held parallel to her body. The suit's gloves kept her hand from shaking, but did nothing to stop the gooseflesh popping up on her skin. The pine cones, 4 of them, floated around the loader like misshapen moons. From their travels on the skiff across Mira's surface, she thought the strange objects were attracted to electromagnetism. She sent a nerve impulse to the boots and gloves to turn their magnetic fields to the lowest level possible while maintaining her footing on the outmost steel deck. The magnetic boots felt lighter and her steps more awkward. In 0G, you had to plan ahead, even if you were attached to something. The lack of resistance meant every movement was relatively lethargic compared to normal gravity and atmosphere. The floating pine cones moved infinitesimally, but she'd still have to plan her way around them. Something told her they were dangerous, and she didn't want to get any closer to them than necessary. She slowly made her way to the side of the loader, stepping as far as she could to the shuttle bay wall. Kelly froze as she watched and waited. The pine cones continued to float without moving towards her. Kelly slowly let out the breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding, shook away the sudden fear that had made her stop, and activated a side camera on her suit. Her HUD lit up with an image in the bottom left corner, focused on the objects so she could keep walking forward and keep an eye on the pine cones at the same time. It didn't completely dispel the fear, but it made it a little easier to deal with. The bay, still mostly shrouded in darkness even through the HUD's low-light filters, was a disaster area. Several other magnetic loaders floated freely above the deck. Steel crates floated near the ceiling as well as at waist level. Whatever had decompressed the bay had tossed the place like grains of sand in a Martian windstorm. Kelly continued walking, her eyes swiveling to the sides of the bay. There had to be emergency O2 stations in here, just had to be. But the first 10 meters into the bay showed nothing. She brought up the schematics, the ones the S&R Black's AI had said were inaccurate, and oriented herself. The shuttle bay wasn't part of the internal schematics they'd been given, but the exterior seemed right. She scanned the diagrams looking for any telltale signs of O2 stations, but there was nothing. She silently cursed and continued walking. Her lights glinted off gray Atmos steel, and she smiled. She found the first shuttle. Kelly focused the lights, the HUD scanning the object and attempting to ferret out its shape. Her eyes widened. This was no shuttle. It was a mining vehicle. Normal shuttles, even 50 years ago, were near-perfect rectangles of steel providing space for a maximum of 15 occupants. They were made for short journeys to both atmospheric and non-atmospheric celestial bodies and, as a last resort, acted as short-term escape pods. Most ships, especially one as large as Mira, had as many escape pods as crew, with a few dozen extras in case of malfunctions or damage. If the crew needed to escape, the pods provided greater protection and longer life support for a single occupant than a shuttle would. But the vehicle in front of her was far from a normal shape. Several cutting beam barrels protruded from the bow as well as what looked like a tow line. Blast shutters hid the trans-aluminum canopy. There was no way for her to look inside. She'd have to do it the hard way. Callie continued hugging the wall, her steps picking up speed. Her HUD hadn't picked up any more of the pinecone-like objects, so she was safe for now. So long as that acid shit isn't in here too, she thought. The acid slicks were the whole reason they were in this mess. If she'd seen the liquid slicks on the outer hull, the skiff might not have suffered broken gas lines, and they'd be headed back to S&R Black, sans casualties. Instead, Elliot's suit had been compromised, his left hand was missing, and they were all suffering from minor concussions. Damn the luck. She tried to open a block connection to the S&R Black AI. Black? She waited for the AI to respond, but there was nothing. Before she and her squad entered the bay, the AI had said it was unable to provide communications with the rest of S&R Black Company. The AI had also said the command crew knew of her situation. She hoped the AI was right. When Black didn't respond, she took a snapshot of the craft and sent a data packet anyway. Her suit would continue trying the message until it was delivered or timed out. Inside Mira, she imagined communications with the AI would be nearly non-existent. Dickerson, bring Elliot and Carb in. I want that door closed behind us.
Aye, Corporal.
Dickerson said. Carbonaro activated her comms.
I got him, boss. I don't think he's conscious yet.
That was worrisome. Elliot's bio-nannies should have been working on the swelling in the Marine's brain, but if there was too much damage, he'd require a nanny infusion. Too bad their medical supplies, and the majority of their weapons, had been on the skiff. Kelly shook away the thoughts and stared at the shuttle's port side. A large gash in the hull told her the vehicle was beyond repair. Even if she could power it up, its integrity had been savaged. She cursed and checked her stats. 5 minutes had passed since she walked into the bay. How many more did Elliot have left before he ran out of O2? She studied the rip in the hull. Now that she was looking directly at it, she noticed it was far from uniform. Instead, the edges were bent inward as if something had opened the hull like an ancient can opener. Kelly took a still image with her block, tagged it, and immediately continued down the bay. Her lights shined on a similar vehicle. However, this one had a drill affixed to the bow. As with its near twin, the blast shutters covered the canopy windows. She walked down its port side. There was no visible damage to the fuselage. No control panels. Shit. As fast as she could, she walked back to the bow and headed to the starboard side. There, the outline of a large hatch appeared. She smiled with a sigh of relief. Now the only questions were if the shuttle had O2 reserves and an intact hull. Carb, bring Elliot forward to the starboard side of the second shuttle. Mind the pine cones. Dickerson, keep covering them. If she needs help getting past those things, you better make it happen.
Aye, boss.
Carb said. Dickerson responded as well, but used her rank. Kelly walked a few more steps forward until she faced the large hatch. The 15-meter-long mining vehicle was thankfully strapped to collapsible posts sticking out from the deck. That was the only reason it wasn't floating along with all the other junk in the bay. At least there's that, she thought. As with the manual control to the shuttle bay doors, a recessed panel sat flush against the mining vehicle's hull. She flipped it up and stared at the controls. The status lights were dead. There was no telling how long the craft had been without power, let alone the last time it was flown. She didn't see any telltale signs of damage to the hull. Maybe she'd get lucky. Kelly put her left hand on the manual power handle and pumped it. A red light appeared next to the handle. She grinned. "Carb, Dickerson, give me a status,"
Boss,
Carbonaro said, an edge of fatigue gliding beneath her words.
I'm about 5 meters away from you. Corporal,
Dickerson said.
Walking behind them in cover.
"Good," Kelly said, and pumped the handle again. The red light blinked twice and then stopped. If the mining vehicle was anything like the older shuttles and smaller ships, the friction of pulling the handle charged a small EMP-hardened generator that would provide at least enough power to open the doors and activate an emergency light. Inside, there was probably a larger generator she could kickstart. She hoped. 2 more up and down pushes of the handle, and the status light turned yellow. She gave it one more try, and the light finally turned green. "Thank you," she thought. "At least something on this ship works. Okay, squad, hold your positions,"
Boss, Elliot's running out of O2. His status lights are turning yellow.
Herb said. The brief feeling of victory dissipated. How much time had she wasted getting to the vehicle? How much time had she wasted looking for the hatch on the wrong side? Kelly shook away the self-recriminations. If she continued listening to the doubts, she'd never be able to make a decision, much less save her squad. She took in a deep breath, exhaled, and then hit the open button on the panel. There was no sound as the hatch slid into the fuselage. A dim sliver of light broke through the widening gap in the cockpit's side. She stared down at the deck, watching as the yellow glow seemed to disappear against the harsh glare of her suit lights. When the hatch finished opening, she raised her eyes and took a step forward. Then she froze, her boot hanging a few centimeters in the air. A body sat in the pilot's chair. The face, crusted with a layer of ice, was frozen in a scream. The wide, glazed eyes stared at the blast-shielded canopy in horror. The hands were locked in a defensive posture, as if the pilot had been trying to keep someone, or something, from attacking him. The co-pilot's chair was empty, but the fabric-covered plasteel was shredded, as if from claws or a vibro-knife's blade. What the hell happened here? Kelly thought. Frozen red droplets floated above the chair's port side. The jumpsuit, at least from what she could see, had a small patch of color. Kelly climbed in and stared at the console. The board was completely dark save for a dull blue glow, lighting the panel marked Emergency. Icons for light, life support, and communications floated above the panel. Kelly closed the cockpit hatch, closed her eyes, and clenched her fists. "Please work," she said to no one. She opened her eyes and reached for the life support icon. The shuttle shuddered slightly beneath her as the nuclear power cell woke from its slumber. Although she could hear nothing through her helmet, she saw a burst of white sputter from one of the vents at her feet. The icon pulsed blue while a green bar slowly rose from its base. The bar continued to rise, eliciting a tepid grin. "Come on, come on." The bar finally reached the top of the icon. The blue color disappeared, completely replaced by green. They had O2. They had an atmosphere. And for now, at least, they had somewhere to treat Elliot. "Carb, Dickerson, get Elliot to the second shuttle, right now. I'm opening its cargo hatch."
"Aye, boss,"
Carbonaro said. Kelly touched the cargo hatch icon. The emergency panel blinked twice, and she watched as the life support icon turned from green to blue. The mining craft was siphoning the O2 back into its tanks. When the icon was completely drained of color, the hatch icon lit up green. She turned in the chair to face the shuttle's cargo hold behind her and suddenly wished she had examined it before telling her squad to come in. A corpse floated just above the deck, its tattered jumpsuit barely hanging together. The remaining yellow fabric was splattered with dark red. A coil of intestines floated freely from the corpse's abdomen through a ragged rip. A floating rib jutted out through the tortured skin. Kelly gulped down a rush of bile. After making sure there were no other surprises in the cargo hold, she turned to the open hatch. Lance Corporal Dickerson, taller than either Lance Corporal Carbonaro and Elliot, stood with his back to the opening. Kelly was glad to see the Marine protecting both the rear and flank. Carbonaro carried Elliot's limp form with ease. Between the zero-G and her augmented suit, any human being would be easy to carry. "Get in here," Kelly said.
I got him, boss,
Carbonaro said without looking up. She was too busy checking her steps and making sure she got Elliot's unconscious body into the shuttle without his mag boots catching on the hatch lip. When she finally looked up, her helmet pointed directly at the corpse floating near the port side.
Christ,
She said in a drawn-out hiss. Kelly moved forward and grabbed Elliot around the shoulders and pulled his inert body to the floor. "Dickerson, get in here, now,"
Aye, Corporal.
Dickerson said. He took one last scan of the lifeless, cluttered shuttle bay and then backed into the shuttle. His helmet clipped the top of the hatch, but he didn't seem to even notice. He bent slightly and continued walking backward until he was inside. He punched the cargo hatch controls, and the hatch quickly slid closed. Kelly shuffled into the cockpit and once again tapped the life support icon. The green bar rose quickly. When it was full, she checked her HUD. They had pressure. They had an atmosphere. Her HUD flashed from a massive temperature change. The remaining power from the nuclear cell was enough to heat the compartments. They wouldn't freeze here, and they wouldn't suffocate. For now, they had a chance. "Dickerson, Carb, the second your HUD says the temp is warm enough, get your helmets off."
Why?
Carbonaro asked. "Need to conserve the O2 in our tanks,"
Right.
Dickerson said. "Then get him out of the suit," Kelly said. "Be careful about it." She tapped a few icons on the emergency panel and brought up the vehicle's schematics. She scrolled through the list of equipment and finally found what she was looking for. She let out a long sigh of relief and returned to the shuttle's cargo hold. Both Dickerson and Carbonaro had removed their helmets and magnetized them to the shuttle's bulkhead. Carb's short hair stuck up in spikes, making her look like a Martian burnout. Her eyes seemed dazed, as did Dickerson's. They said nothing as they bent over their unconscious comrade and removed Elliot's helmet. A hiss of air escaped the connectors. The emergency kit no doubt had a nanny injector, hopefully more than one, but what she needed, what they all needed, was an autodoc, analgesics, and sleep. She doubted they'd be getting any of those. "Dickerson, Carb, either of you feel nauseous?" She watched their faces as she scrambled into the shuttle's rear. Carb slowly nodded. Her normally pale face looked as white as the lights over their heads. "Okay," Kelly said with a sigh. "Get yourselves up against the bulkhead. Dickerson, you okay?" He nodded. "Feel like I was run over by a grav racer, but I'm alive." Kelly walked past the three Marines into the panel at the rear. She stepped by the floating corpse, managing to do so without giving it more than a glance. She could be creeped out later. For now, they had to get Elliot stabilized. Her HUD glowed with Elliot's vitals. His blood pressure was dangerously low, as was his heartbeat. He needed adrenaline. She ripped open the panel and pulled out the emergency kit. Yellow pressure straps locked it closed. Kelly couldn't help but smile. The kit had never been used. She just hoped its contents hadn't reached their expiration dates. The shuttle might have spent the last 43 years in near absolute zero, so she doubted anything could have spoiled. Emergency kits were supposed to survive the cold and ZG nature of deep space, but Kelly had no idea if one had ever been subjected to this kind of abuse for so long. She pulled her blade, quickly cut through the straps, and opened the kit. 2 bio-nanny injectors, still in their containers, sat firmly in a recessed pocket of the case. "Dickerson, you got him free yet?" "Working on it, Corporal," Dickerson said. He sounded tired, drowsy, and more than a little annoyed. Kelly ignored him and walked to Carbonaro. The Lance Corporal had placed an elbow on her knee and rested her head upon her hand. Kelly pulled one of the analgesic strips from the kit and knelt down next to her squad mate. "Look up at me, Carb." The Marine dropped her hand and slowly brought her head up to meet Kelly's stare. Carbonaro had a burst blood vessel in her left eye. Shit, Kelly said. What's your block say? Carbonaro grinned with a flash of white teeth. That I have a concussion. Kelly rolled her eyes. What else? Any suit damage? The Lance Corporal shook her head and then grimaced. No, suit integrity is good. Kelly looked down at the 2 injectors. She wanted to hit Carb with a full dose, make sure she would recover more quickly, but the medkit only had 2 doses, and Elliot had suffered severe trauma. If one injection didn't help save his life, it might require 2. Okay, I'm going to get an analgesic for you. I can't give you any bio-nannies right now. Carb nodded. Her grin had faded into a grimace of pain. Elliot, give them to Elliot. I just need to rest for a few minutes. Bullshit, Dickerson said. You need a goddamned auto doc. Kelly glanced over at Dickerson. The large Marine had pulled Elliot's suit down far enough to expose the severed limb. The SFMC combat suit had applied a tourniquet to the wound by constricting the sleeve just above the missing hand. Dickerson pulled a vibroblade from his belt. No, Kelly said. He looked at her, his eyebrows raised in a question. What is it, Corporal? The suit, Kelly said. Don't take it all the way off. She pointed at Elliot's stump. The suit's sealed off the arm. Only way to get that sleeve off is to cut it off. Right, I get that, Dickerson said. He shook his head slightly and grimaced in pain. Sorry, eyes keep going a little fuzzy. Not surprised, Kelly said. But if we cut that suit off him, he won't be able to leave the shuttle again. Not until we find him another suit. Dickerson thought for a moment before returning the blade to his belt. Shit, you're right. Sorry, he said, not really thinking clearly. Don't apologize, she said. Kelly leaned over and handed him an injector. Hit him with this and monitor his block. Ah, Corporal. Dickerson unbent Elliot's legs so his mag boots attached the unconscious Marine to the floor. The magnetics in Elliot's remaining hand anchored him to the bulkhead. With the suit partially removed, the wounded Marine's jumpsuit was exposed. Dickerson knelt over him, clicked the injector, and then stabbed it into the meat of Elliot's shoulder. The injector hissed as it delivered thousands of bio-nannies suspended in a viscous liquid. The moment the nannies entered his bloodstream, they would connect to the swarms already in his damaged system and become part of the established neural network. Elliot's block, thankfully still functional, would help direct the molecular-sized robots to the most damaged tissues. With any luck, they'd also help alleviate the shock his body had descended into. Kelly looked back at Carb. The woman slumped against the bulkhead, eyes wandering across the interior of the shuttle, unfocused and confused. Still with me, Carbonaro? Unfortunately, she said. Kelly smiled at her and pulled a fingernail-sized dermal patch from the kit. She held it on one finger and then placed it against Carbonaro's forehead. The gray patch slowly turned blue. That should help a little. Aye, boss, Carbonaro said with a tired salute. Kelly felt a wave of nausea and held out a hand to the bulkhead. Okay, she thought. I have a concussion too. Great. She closed her eyes for a moment and waited for the sensation to subside. I might as well be the medic for the squad and I'm barely functioning. The buzz and whirl inside her stomach finally stopped, as if it had never been there. Kelly opened her eyes. Carbonaro stared at her. What? You're not doing great either, boss, Carbonaro said with a pained expression. Better than you, at least, Kelly said. Carbonaro nodded. For now, you're going to need sleep later. Right, Kelly said, but not now, not for any of us. I need you to stay awake. I've been concussed before, the Lance Corporal said. I think it goes with the job. No shit, Dickerson said. Kelly turned in his direction. The broad-shouldered Marine had stood to his full height, the empty bio-nanny injector still held between his fingers. He pointed down at Elliot. How long do we wait for those little bastards to do their job? We'll give it 30. If he's not improving after that, we'll hit him again, Kelly said. Dickerson seemed to finally notice the corpse floating in the shuttle's hold. What the hell did that to him? Kelly hadn't really studied the frozen body, but now with the adrenaline rush fading and her Marines as safe as she could make them, she had more than ample opportunity, and what she saw unnerved the shit out of her. The unfortunate man's jumpsuit was ripped and torn just above the left hip where the coils of intestine had leaked out. "I've no idea," Kelly said. Carbonaro yawned. "Not sure I want to know," she said. She pointed at the floating corpse. "Those gouges and those bruises? Looks to me like someone tried to rip him apart with their bare hands." The shuttle was still cold, but the atmosphere had finally ticked up above freezing. The line of frost on the dead man's face was no longer white. A single droplet of water slid off the remains of the corpse's nose. "Shit," Kelly said. "They're thawing." Dickerson groaned. "Great. Pretty soon we're going to be swimming in a ZG abattoir." He was right. Once the temperature rose high enough, the blood, the entrails, the bile, the gas, the shit and piss, everything the body had loosed during the final frenzied moment of the man's life would unfreeze. Because there were no active bacteria in the frozen vacuum, the body hadn't decomposed. It would be as though he had just died. Globs of frozen blood and other fluids had already leaked from the corpse before it froze. They floated near the hole's roof like tiny crimson snowballs. "Shit," Kelly said. "Guess I should have pushed the corpses out before we got Elliot in." Carbonaro groaned, her eyelids drooping until they nearly covered the whites of her eyes. "I don't mind blood," she said, "but I don't want that crap getting inside my suit." Dickerson yawned. Kelly turned to look at him. His eyes seemed to swim in their sockets before finally refocusing. He noticed her stare and blushed. "Sorry, Corporal, I think I need a stimulant." Kelly's left eye throbbed. Another migraine. Whether it was from the stress or the concussion, she wasn't sure. But if the nannies didn't start taking care of it soon, she would probably lose vision in it. "I think all three of us do, Dickerson." She rose from her knees and walked to Elliot. The Marine's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow, and his face was far too pale. "He's been unconscious way too long," she said. Dickerson nodded, one temple throbbing with stress. "Yeah," he said, his voice little more than a croak. "Do we hit him with the last nanny shot?" She checked Elliot's vital signs on her block. His blood pressure was low, heart rate slow, and his brain activity barely registered. "He's going to die anyway," she said to herself. "We may need those nannies for us." "Not yet," she said aloud. "We need to give the little buggers more time." Dickerson blinked at her and clenched his jaw. She could almost see the same thoughts bouncing around in his head. "Right," he said. "I guess we better batten down for a few minutes, see if he recovers." Without another word, Dickerson attached himself to the bulkhead and relaxed. Kelly shook her head hard. A bolt of pain lanced through her brain as she winced. The pain helped clear the fog again, although she knew the fuzz and confusion would shortly return. "I'm going to have to scrounge for supplies soon." Dickerson shook his head. "No, Corporal," he said. "You have the most medical training." He nodded toward Carbonaro. "She's barely awake, and if she goes down, she's going to need you more than me." He dropped his eyes to Elliot. "Not to mention him." She opened her mouth to reply and then closed it. She was the squad leader. She was in charge of the three Marines. If they needed a scout, logic dictated it couldn't be her. She slowly nodded. "Okay," she said. "I can at least try and get the shuttle's radio working." "Right," Dickerson said. He closed his eyes and slapped his face. The mag glove deadened the sound of the smack, but a large red print appeared on his cheek. He winced, opened his eyes, and shook his head. "Well," he said, "that hurt." "Duh," Carbonaro said, her lips curved in a slight smile. "Did it help?" He detached himself from the wall and picked up his helmet. "Guess I'll take out the trash, too," he said, and nodded to the floating corpse. "Drag him into the cockpit, close the hatch, and toss him out when I depressurize." "Good plan," Kelly said. "You'll find another one in there, too. He's sitting in one of the pilot chairs." "Wonderful," Dickerson said. "Any other bodies?" "None that I saw," Kelly said. "But be careful out there. No telling what else is floating around." "Roger that," he said. He put his helmet on and paused.
Okay, I've got pressure and green across the board,
He said through the suit's speakers. "Try your block comms," Kelly said. The helmet's visor, black as space, hid his expression. For a moment, she wasn't sure he'd even heard her. Can you hear me, Corporal? Kelly smiled and raised a thumb. The large Marine nodded to her and Mag walked to the floating corpse. His left hand curled around the dead man's shoulder. Once I get outside, I'll try another block comm. If you don't hear from me, just assume I'm out there taking a stroll and trying to find a coffee. Asshole, Kelly said. Just be careful, Dickerson. We don't have the medical supplies to patch you up if you get any more damaged. Aye, Corporal. He mag walked over Elliot's prone body and into the cockpit, the corpse floating just behind him. Dickerson's movements were awkward, but she couldn't tell if that was because he was concussed or the fact he was dragging a corpse into the smaller cockpit area. After a moment, Dickerson finally managed to fit the body through the hatch. He waved to her before the hatch slid closed, leaving Callie alone with her 2 charges. A few seconds later, the shuttle vibrated. Dickerson had undoubtedly vented the atmosphere from the cockpit. Kelly tried to relax, but the dead, screaming face of the corpse kept flashing in her mind. Whatever had happened on Mira had caught these men by surprise. She hoped Dickerson would meet the same fate.